The moment I saw her name on my client list, I stopped breathing. 18 years. 18 years since she stood in the middle of our high school cafeteria and made sure everyone knew what she'd done to me. She didn't recognize me when she walked into my office. She smiled that same smile. Extended her hand. Said she was so pleased to meet me. I shook it. I smiled back. And in that exact moment I made a decision I had been unknowingly preparing for since I was 16 years old. The question isn't whether what I did was wrong. The question is, would you have done anything differently? The name on the list. I have a rule in my office. No personal photographs. No sentimental objects. Nothing that reminds me of who I was before I became who I am. I built that rule at 16 and I never broke it. Until the morning I saw her name on my client intake list. Danielle Kowalski. I read it 3 times. My assistant had already confirmed the appointment. Danielle Kowalski. New client consultation. 10 a.m. Tuesday. I sat very still for a long time. There are names you forget over the years. Hers was never one of them. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. The kind of town where everyone knew everything and forgetting was considered a personal failure. Danielle Kowalski was the golden girl of Harrow Creek High School. Cheer captain. Student council. The kind of beautiful that made teachers grade her easier and boys forget their own names. I was none of those things. I was the quiet girl who read too much and talked too little and made the fatal mistake of trusting the wrong person with the one secret that could detonate my entire life. I was 16 when I told Danielle I was gay. She was the first person I ever told. I thought we were friends. Hidden clue number 1, I said I thought we were friends. I'll tell you later what she actually was. By the following Monday the entire school knew. Not just knew, had been told a version designed for maximum damage. Danielle didn't just out me. She constructed a story. Added details that weren't true. Made it ugly and shameful and public in the way that only a 17-year-old with social power and zero conscience can manage. My parents found out through a neighbor. My father didn't speak to me for 4 months. My mother cried for 3 days straight and then pretended nothing had happened, which was somehow worse. I finished sophomore year with my head down, transferred schools junior year, and spent the next decade quietly building a wall between myself and Harrow Creek so high I could almost pretend it never existed. Almost. I became a corporate attorney. 12 years of brutal, focused, relentless work. I made partner at 31. Youngest in my firm's history. I did not do it for the title. I did it because competence is the best armor money can buy. And now Danielle Kowalski was sitting in my waiting room. Needing my help. I took exactly 4 minutes to compose myself. I straightened my jacket. Checked my reflection. Put on the face I wear in courtrooms, calm, unreadable, completely in control. Then I walked out to meet her. She stood up when she saw me. Smiled. Extended her hand. Hi, I'm Danielle. I'm so grateful you could fit me in. She had aged the way pretty people do when life starts pushing back. Still attractive. But tired around the eyes. A tension in her jaw that hadn't been there at 17. She had no idea who I was. None. I shook her hand. Of course, I said. Please, come in. She sat across from my desk and began explaining her situation. Divorce proceedings. Complicated assets. A husband who had, according to Danielle, been systematically hiding money for the last 4 years. She needed someone aggressive. Someone precise. Someone who knew how to find things people tried to bury. I almost smiled. She had come to exactly the right place. Hidden clue number 2, she said her husband had been hiding things for 4 years. The timing of that matters. Remember it. I took notes. Asked the right questions. Performed the consultation with complete professionalism. When it was over she shook my hand again and said I was exactly what she'd been looking for. I told her I'd have my assistant send over the retainer agreement. She left looking relieved. The moment the elevator doors closed, I sat back down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started researching Danielle Kowalski's life. Not for the divorce case. For myself. What I found in the next 3 hours changed everything I thought I knew about why she'd really walked through my door. I told myself it was due diligence. Every good attorney researches their client before signing a retainer. That's what I told myself. Danielle Kowalski had married a man named Brett Harmon 6 years ago. Venture capitalist. Old Chicago money. The kind of wealthy that doesn't need to advertise itself. They had one daughter. Age 4. On the surface it looked like exactly what she'd described. A woman leaving a bad marriage. Protecting her assets. Fighting for her child. Sympathetic. Clean. Straightforward. But I'd spent 12 years learning that the surface of things is always a performance. So I went deeper. Brett Harmon's financial records were public enough to sketch an outline. 3 businesses. 2 investment portfolios. A property in the Caymans that wasn't listed under his name but was listed under a shell company registered to an address I recognized. I sat up straighter. The address was in Harrow Creek, Ohio. I ran the shell company registration. It took 40 minutes to trace through 3 layers of paperwork. The registered agent at that Harrow Creek address was Danielle's father. I leaned back in my chair. Danielle had told me her husband was hiding money. What she hadn't mentioned was that her own family was helping him do it. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept turning the geometry of it over in my mind. A wife accusing her husband of hiding assets. A husband hiding those assets through the wife's own father. Either Danielle knew and was lying to me. Or Danielle didn't know and her father was betraying her. Both possibilities were interesting. Only one of them was useful to me. I came into the office early the next morning. My assistant had already sent over the retainer agreement. Danielle had signed it at 11 p.m. the night before. She was desperate. That was useful too. I called a contact at the Financial Crimes Division. Not officially. Just a conversation between 2 people who had helped each other before. I described the shell company structure without using names. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's not asset hiding. That's asset protection. Someone built that structure deliberately. Years ago. Before the marriage. Before the marriage." I hung up and sat very still. If the structure was built before the marriage, then Brett hadn't hidden the money from Danielle during the divorce. He had hidden it from her since before they even said "I do." Which meant someone had warned him. Someone who knew Danielle well enough to know she'd eventually need to be managed. Someone close to her from the very beginning. I picked up my phone and called my research contact. "I need everything you can find on a Ronald Kowalski. Harrow Creek, Ohio. Should be in his late 60s. She called back in 2 hours. Ronald Kowalski. Retired bank manager. And I felt the floor shift slightly beneath me when I read this, former business partner of Brett Harmon's father. They had known each other for 30 years. Danielle's father and her husband's father. Old friends. Old partners. Which meant this marriage was never an accident. First twist, Danielle Kowalski didn't fall in love with Brett Harmon. She was placed with him. Introduced deliberately. Carefully. By 2 men who had been planning a financial arrangement that required a cooperative wife inside the marriage. Danielle wasn't the villain of this story. She was the asset. I sat with that for a long time. The girl who destroyed my life at 16. The girl I had spent 18 years quietly hating. Had spent the last 6 years being quietly sold. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt something much more complicated than that. But then I found the last piece of that morning's research. And complicated became irrelevant. My contact had pulled Danielle's personal email records through a legal discovery channel I had access to as her attorney. Standard procedure. Building the case. In her drafts folder, never sent, was a message. Written 8 months ago. Addressed to a name I recognized immediately. My name. She had found me 8 months ago. She had typed out 4 paragraphs. And never sent them. I read every word 3 times. I know you probably hate me. You have every right to. What I did to you when we were 17 was unforgivable, and I have never stopped knowing that. I need to tell you something about why it happened. Not as an excuse. As a confession. I was told to do it. The room went very quiet. My father found your journal in my bedroom. He read it. He told me that if I didn't handle it publicly and permanently, he would. I was 17. I was terrified of him. I did what he told me. I have hated myself for it every single day since. I closed my laptop. Stood up. Walked to my office window and looked out at the city for a long time. Danielle hadn't betrayed me out of cruelty. She had betrayed me out of fear. Of the same man who had spent the last 6 years selling her into a controlled marriage. Her father hadn't just hurt me. He had been hurting his own daughter for decades. And now they were both sitting in the middle of a legal case that had just landed on my desk. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel everything. The anger. The grief. The strange, unwanted compassion. Then I put it all in a box, closed the lid, and went back to work. Because here is what 18 years of quiet survival teaches you. Feelings are information. But information is only useful when you know what to do with it. I requested a second meeting with Danielle. Told my assistant to schedule it for Thursday. Private conference room. No other staff. Then I spent the next 2 days building something she didn't know she needed. I pulled every financial record connected to Ronald Kowalski. The shell company in the Caymans. 3 other holding structures in Delaware. A trust established in 2015 that had Danielle's daughter listed as a beneficiary, but with Ronald as sole trustee until the child turned 25. That last part stopped me cold. Danielle's 4-year-old daughter. Her father had already positioned himself to control the child's inheritance for the next 21 years. He wasn't just managing Danielle. He was already managing the next generation. I thought about my own father. 4 months of silence when I was 16. I thought about what it costs a child when the person who is supposed to protect them becomes the thing they need protecting from. I kept working. By Wednesday night I had built a complete financial map. Ronald Kowalski and Brett Harmon Sr. had established their arrangement in 1987. Danielle was born in 1990. Brett Jr. was born in 1989. They had been intended for each other since before either of them could walk. 2 men. 30 years of planning. 2 children used as instruments of a financial merger disguised as a love story. I found the prenuptial agreement next. Standard enough on the surface. But buried in Section 14, subsection C, in language so dense it required 3 readings, a clause. If Danielle initiated divorce proceedings, primary custody of their daughter defaulted to Brett. Unless Danielle could prove financial misconduct. Which was exactly why she had come to me. She wasn't just fighting for her assets. She was fighting for her daughter. She just didn't know yet that her own father had written that clause. Ronald Kowalski's signature was on the original draft as Danielle's legal representative. He had sat across from his own daughter at a signing table and handed her a document designed to trap her. Thursday morning Danielle walked into my conference room looking like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. She was holding a coffee cup with both hands. Like she needed something to grip. I let her sit down. I let her settle. Then I opened the folder in front of me and turned it to face her. I need to show you some things, I said. And I need you to let me get through all of it before you respond. She nodded. I walked her through everything. The shell company. The Delaware structures. Her father's signature on the prenuptial draft. The trust controlling her daughter's inheritance. She didn't cry immediately. She went through something worse than crying. She went completely still. The kind of stillness that happens when a person's entire understanding of their own life is being quietly dismantled in front of them. When I finished, she looked up at me. "How did you find all of this?" "It's what I do," I said. She looked back down at the folder. "My father did this." Not a question. A reckoning. "Your father and Brett's father built this structure together," I said. "Brett may have known. He may not have. That matters legally. It doesn't change what was done to you." She nodded slowly. Like she was filing information in a place inside herself she'd never needed before. Then she looked up again. And said something I wasn't prepared for. "You went to Harrow Creek High School." The room temperature dropped several degrees. "Didn't you?" she said. It wasn't a question either. Second twist, "I recognized you the moment I walked into your office," Danielle said quietly. "I've thought about you for 18 years. I know exactly what your face looks like." She had known who I was the entire time. "I didn't come to you because your firm was recommended," she said. "I came to you specifically. I looked for you specifically. Because you're the only person I've ever wronged who became powerful enough to actually help me." The coffee cup was still in both her hands. She set it down very carefully. "I know I don't deserve your help," she said. "I know what I did to you. I know it changed your life. But my daughter is 4 years old and she has done nothing wrong, and I am running out of time and options, and you are the best attorney in this city." She reached into her bag. Pulled out an envelope. Set it on the table between us. "I wrote that 8 months ago," she said. "I couldn't send it. I was afraid you'd refuse to see me if you knew who I was. I was more afraid you'd be right to." I looked at the envelope. My name on the front in her handwriting. The unsent confession I had already read sitting in her drafts folder. I had 2 choices in that moment. Walk away. Refer her to another attorney. Maintain the clean, bright line between her life and mine. Or stay. I looked at the woman across from me. Not the girl from the cafeteria. The woman. Exhausted. Trapped. Asking for help from the last person who owed her anything. I thought about her daughter. 4 years old. Already being managed by a man who had spent decades treating the people he was supposed to love as pieces on a board. I thought about being 16. "I'm not doing this for you," I said finally. She nodded. "I know. My rate is $450 an hour." "I know that too." I picked up my pen. "Then let's talk about how we're going to dismantle everything your father built." For the first time since she'd walked into my office, she exhaled. "The case took 11 months, I want to be honest about that. There was nothing fast or cinematic about what came next. No dramatic courtroom moment where everything collapsed in a single afternoon. It was 11 months of documents and depositions and late nights and phone calls that went nowhere and then suddenly everywhere. But I'll tell you the parts that mattered. 3 weeks in, Brett Harmon hired his own attorney. A good one. Expensive. The kind of firm that wins by exhausting the other side into surrender. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I had spent 12 years becoming unmovable. I had spent 18 years becoming motivated. That combination is not something you can bill against. The first deposition was Ronald Kowalski. I had prepared for that room for 2 weeks, not just legally. Personally. He walked in looking like what he was. A man who had never once been held accountable for anything. Comfortable. Slightly bored. The particular arrogance of someone who has spent decades being the smartest person in every room he chose to enter. He didn't recognize me either. I hadn't expected him to. I was nobody to Ronald Kowalski. I was the girl his daughter had destroyed on his instruction and then forgotten entirely. I let him get comfortable. I asked the routine questions first. His business history. His relationship with Brett Sr. The timeline of the shell company establishment. He answered smoothly. Carefully. 30 years of financial maneuvering had made him an excellent liar. Then I opened a folder. Mr. Kowalski, I'd like to direct your attention to a journal entry dated October 14, 2003. He went still. Here's what I had found in the final week of my investigation. Ronald Kowalski kept records of everything like my father. Like me, meticulous, careful, comprehensive records, including a personal journal he had kept since 1987 and stored in a safety deposit box at a bank in Harrow Creek. A safety deposit box that had been subpoenaed as part of the financial discovery process. Hidden clue number 1 revealed. I said I thought Danielle and I were friends. She was never my friend. She was my neighbor. Ronald Kowalski had positioned his family 2 streets away from mine deliberately, after reading a county development report that identified my father's property as a future acquisition target. He had been watching my family for 3 years before his daughter ever spoke to me. The journal entry from October 14, 2003. Ronald's own handwriting, describing in precise, clinical detail his decision to instruct Danielle to publicly expose me, not because he was protecting his daughter's reputation. Because my father had refused to sell him our family property. He used his 17-year-old daughter to punish a man who wouldn't do business with him. I was collateral damage in a land dispute. I read the relevant section into the deposition record. Ronald Kowalski's attorney objected 4 times. I had anticipated every objection. When I finished reading, Ronald looked across the table at me and for the first time, actually looked. I watched the recognition move across his face slow. Then all at once, like a tide coming in. You're David Marsh's daughter, he said. I am, I said. Complete silence in the deposition room. This is a conflict of interest, his attorney said immediately. It is not, I said. I have no personal claim in this proceeding. I am representing my client. Everything in that journal is legally obtained discovery material. If you'd like to challenge the subpoena, you're welcome to try. They tried, they failed. The journal became the backbone of everything. 37 years of Ronald Kowalski's decisions, recorded in his own hand, submitted into evidence with his own signature on every page. He had documented his own destruction with the same meticulous care he'd applied to everything else. Hidden clue number 2 revealed. Danielle said her husband had been hiding money for 4 years. 4 years ago was when Danielle first told her father she was unhappy in the marriage. He had begun protecting the assets the moment he knew she might try to leave. He had been 1 step ahead of her for her entire life. Until now. The settlement took 6 weeks to negotiate. After the deposition, Brett Harmon, faced with the journal and a complete financial map, made a decision that surprised everyone except me. He cooperated. It turned out Brett had known about his father's arrangement with Ronald. What he hadn't known, what genuinely shocked him, was that Ronald had been skimming from the shared assets for years. Brett hadn't just been Danielle's captor. He'd been Ronald's too. In the end, Brett and Danielle reached an agreement without going to trial. Joint custody. Equal assets. The Cayman property liquidated and split. The trust controlling their daughter's inheritance dissolved and restructured with an independent trustee. Ronald Kowalski was referred to the State Financial Crimes Division. I made that call myself. The last day of proceedings, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time. 11 months, hundreds of hours. One of the most complicated cases of my career. And underneath all of it, a 16-year-old girl sitting in a cafeteria, watching her life detonate, not yet knowing that the explosion had been set by a man she'd never properly met. Danielle called me that evening. I almost didn't answer. I did. She didn't say thank you. I think she knew that wasn't the right word. Instead she said, my daughter asked me today why I seemed different. I told her I felt safer than I used to. A pause. She said, good. Because I want to feel safe too. I didn't say anything for a moment. She will, I said finally. We haven't spoken since. I don't know if we will. There is too much history between us for friendship and not enough resolution for closure. We exist somewhere in the complicated space between. But here is what I know. I did not take that case for revenge. I told myself I didn't. And somewhere around month 4, somewhere between the 3rd deposition and the 5th motion, I realized I was telling the truth. I took it for the 4-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong. I took it because I know what it costs a child when the person who is supposed to protect them becomes the thing they need protecting from. I took it because I am very good at finding things people try to bury, and maybe, just maybe, I took it because somewhere inside the attorney I became, The 16-year-old girl I used to be finally got to walk into a room and be the most powerful person in it. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's just human. Ronald Kowalski's trial date is set for spring. I won't be in that courtroom, but I built the case that put him there, and sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and my office is empty, that is enough. And if the person who destroyed you turned out to be a victim themselves, could you find it in you to help them? Or would 18 years of damage make that impossible?